Welcome all to my paranormal closet, where the stories and magic take place. Today's guest is well-versed in science and the supernatural, demonology and history of the occult, as well as theology and physics, among other things. She is an archbishop, author and speaker, wife, mother, and a paranormal investigator. She is a consultant for MGM Studios and has been featured in numerous documentaries and podcasts, including The Attached on Amazon Prime, which has won 17 international filmmaking awards. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Mother Kristina Rake. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you very much.
I'm fascinated by all these topics, and I'm curious as to how you got so interested and involved with them all. Like, what's the difference between the traditional Catholic Church and the international independent Catholic Church?
Well, our group, our movement, we're really a movement, and it's called the Independent Sacramental Movement. And you know how Eastern Orthodox churches go all the way back to the apostles, but they're not under the Pope? We're the same. If you trace us back, you can trace back all the ordinations and laying on of hands back to an apostle. For myself, it would be Philip and Bartholomew. However, because we're not under the jurisdiction of the Pope, we're like the Greek Orthodox Church or the Anglican Church, who broke away in the 18th century. And so because we're not legally under the authority of Rome, we can't ordain women. We are inclusive of the LGBTQ community and actually work for equal rights for them. And so we have that freedom to marry the ancient religion with more open sensibilities. What I explain to people is I'm theologically traditional, but socially progressive. So,
as it should be.
Yes, exactly. We're trying to do what we thought Jesus.
As I understand it, you have some experience dealing with haunted attachments. Can you explain to my listeners exactly what that means?
Well, I think about it this way. We all collect things. You can see behind me, I collect things. Things have power. Their history has power. Your mother's wedding ring has some kind of power to it, has this emotional attachment to it. And people over time using objects, sometimes our attachment to the object is so strong that in the afterlife, there's an actual signature to the attachment. I mean, as psychic mediums call it telemetry, the ability to read an object. And some objects over time get so imbued with either what we would call, what's the term? Residue, spiritual residue, or even curses, or some kind of magical spell upon them, or some kind of emotional codependence, that the object itself becomes imbued with that. And in order to remove that, we have to take the object and we have to perform some kind of religious rite on it. For me, that would be a Catholic blessing. Every blessing is literally theologically an exorcism. Every time I bless holy water, it's an exorcism. Every time I bless your house, it's an exorcism, because the process is to sort of push God in and pull out any of the dusty residue. Some objects, their attachments are much more difficult to deal with than others. Some I wouldn't even mess with. Don't burn them, bury them. For me, it's throw them in water, sink them to the bottom. That's the best course of action, because they really shouldn't be touched otherwise.
So suffice it to say, it's probably common that there are more negative energies, attachments to them than positive.
I think the negative ones get more press.
Oh, okay.
You know, like your heirlooms or your great grandmother's diary. Those have positive attachments
right.
to them. But
those memories,
don't call me in for those.
Right.
They get more press.
I know from writing my books that the antique shops in town, in my county, they specifically sage anything that they bring into their shops, because they've had experiences when they haven't done so, where things have reacted in their building or created energies they weren't really interested in participating in. So they made it a habit of every time they picked up something that they would sage it before they even sold it to somebody. I personally love antiques. I love antiquing. I love collecting stuff. And I too sage them before I bring them into my home. And if I, for some strange coincidence, forgot to do it and something happens in my house, then I've got to sage the whole house and do all that. But
it's so important because scientifically, if you think about a sort of energy locus, that focal point of that object, if there's a soul that's hanging around, it'll stay with that object. And you'll wind up with the attachment because you buy the pipe, you bring it home. Exactly.
That was going to be my next question. Can people have attachments? So you're saying that that's how people can have attachments happen to them because they brought in something that has been drawn to them and suddenly
that is one way. And I think it's important to distinguish attachment from a possession. An attachment in Judaism, a dybbuk is an attachment. It's not a demon. It's an attachment. It's a human soul that is sort of clinging to you. And you can tell it's an attachment because it's sudden. You come home from the antique shop and you're like, I want a cigarette. I've never had a cigarette in my life. You know, you feel it immediately. You feel this emotional presence around you. And it can come that way. It can come from you going to a place where you and whatever spirit is there have a connection. You like horseback riding. They love horseback riding. And they could kind of see it in you. And so they follow you, because if a soul is earthbound, imagine being in a fever-filled, hazy, strange dream. They're completely unaware, but they're like, oh, and just
looking
kind of
familiarity, looking for familiarity and commonality. So I'm sure that there are obvious connections and obvious signs when somebody has an attachment, but I'm sure that there are so many people that go without even realizing they have an attachment, or if you notice a change in somebody that you're with. For example, if I notice a change in somebody that is in my family and they were one way at one point and then all of a sudden something happened and they were totally this different person, and they spew these things that you don't even know where they're coming from. Could that mean that they have an attachment of some sort?
It could. And whenever there's a sudden personality change, I explained, because I study neuroscience, I'm like, go to a neurologist, because lots of other biological things can cause that. But let's say you go and, you know, there's no brain tumor, there's no damage, there's no aneurysm, there's nothing, no hormonal issues, there's no liver issues, because liver issues cause dementia. So there's none of that going on. That's the point at which you turn to the spiritual. However, the spiritual remedy for an attachment is really easy, so you can try that too. And but
which is what? What's the remedy?
Well, the remedy would be for someone who knows how to, like, see, I'm a psychic medium. I don't prefer that term, but I can see the attachment. I can see where it's sort of in the body. It looks to me like a tick-like thing. So I'll say to person, I'll look at the picture and be like, you're having pain in your neck, because I can tell it's holding on here.
You can look at a photograph
and see. Photograph.
Oh, but that's
my gifts are visual to connect, but they're auditory and visual, so I can hear entire sentences and stuff. So I can look at the photo and be like, you're having pain here, here, here. And they're like, how did you know that? I'm like, that's where I see it connected. And then I pull it off. I use my spirituality, which I'm grounded in, my belief system, and I use that to pull it off. It doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't matter. You have to choose a spirituality, but you have to practice it for years and years and years and years to be grounded.
That faith, that grounded faith, right?
Belief and intention are the entirety of spirituality.
Yes.
So I will pull it off and sort of call in help to send it on its way, to kind of awaken it to the fact that, yeah, you're dead.
You're not belonging
There's
here.
a place you want to go to. Let's send you
Wow.
out there. Um, and like the Dybbuk boxes, that's a ritual in Judaism to pull a human attachment off of a person.
That is so amazing. Can you share a case or two with us without giving any names?
Yeah, I had a family member who is very gifted. Also, he got the family curse, so he's
curse or blessing, right?
Exactly. And I don't recall what city he was at. I believe it was DC on a trip with college, and he was in a museum of crime. So I know it was a big one, and they were walking down a hallway, and they passed by. They had John Wayne Gacy's clown outfit. They had implements of torture and everything. And it was a particular hallway. He was with his friend, and he looked down the corner and he just saw something flip past his eye. He said by the time he got to the top, he felt like complete hopelessness, utter blackness, rage, and he couldn't shake it. And so, he texted me and he's like, I think something grabbed me there. And I'm like, well, if anything was going to grab you, it'd be there. And so I said, right now, take a picture, text it to me. And he did. And I'm like, oh, geez. I mean, he had, as close to a human demon figure as you can get. And
really?
So I pulled it off of him. And an hour later, he was fine. And it never happened again. So that's how you know it's an attachment. You're in a place where you could possibly get an attachment and boom, it's instantaneous. It's not the slow breakdown of a possession. It's just like that.
Here's another question for you. So you know the Long Island medium, right? She goes
Yes.
out and she sees these people and she's drawn to go to them and say, this is what I do, and would you like for me to share it with you? Do you see these attachments on people and go up to them and tap them on the shoulder and say, no, okay, why?
I don't look.
Unless you're asked to.
I don't. My gift is deliberately shut down since I was ordained and became a bishop. Not in the sense that I can't use it, but when you have that connection to people, I don't care how much you think you protect yourself, things can come through that wire. Just like,
oh, you shut it on and off at will, is what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. But
I can understand
I
why.
have no choice. I actually had an interesting story that I can share later, where someone else saw what happens to me because I couldn't tell from my position outward. But I also I wouldn't do that. I just wouldn't, because and it what she does irritates me because it's emotional hijacking. You're going about your day and someone walks up to you and says, oh, your father who died. I don't know where that person is in their life, in their psychology, in their spirituality, what they have to do with their day. I think that's a horrible thing to do to a person. Invitation, I said intention and will, but invitation is another huge element to spirituality. And I will not invade someone's psychological makeup without their invitation.
Interesting. Huh. Okay. I totally get though why it shuts off and on, because of the position that you're in, and you could have something negative try and attack you. So you said it affects you and you don't even realize it, and that somebody picked up on it and said it to you. They saw.
Yep, I was in a gallery reading and there were several very gifted psychics sitting in the back row, and we were in a haunted location. And I was able to pick up names of pets and everything was fine. And then all of a sudden, I could not read these two women. It was like I was shut down. Someone, just completely blocked. And something told me to have them move up a row. And when they moved up a row, I could read them. Like there was a barrier. Well, there was a very, very gifted gentleman in the back who can see um, angels. He could just see them. He can see demons. He could just describe them. And he came up to me afterwards. He goes, "When you asked them to move up, I was just like, wow, she's good." And I laughed, and I'm like, I don't know why I couldn't read them. And he said, "You didn't see it. I was sitting in the back. The lights were on you. There was a hallway at the third row, and this dark figure walked and stood there." He said, and all of a sudden, these two huge beams of light, like columns, shot down in front of you. And that's when you said you couldn't read anybody past the third row. And I had no idea, but it's happened since. I was at a satanic altar, and it was an outdoor place, and it's rumored to be satanic, but we got a horrible EVP there that proved it. And as we were walking up to this open space with stones that you could have climbed over, something shoved me and said, don't go in. And I didn't. I stayed in the perimeter, and we caught an EVP with music and chanting and this horrific voice saying, make her leave, make the girl go. And it was the weekend after I'd been ordained to the priesthood, and I was the only woman there. So there is that protection. Yeah.
That's wonderful to know that you have that protection, though. That's really wonderful. Those spirit guides, those angels, or however you would refer to that.
Yes, it's pretty heavy. But because as a leader, as an archbishop, I'm in charge of all the other bishops, all the other priests, all the parishes, all the deacons, all our orphanage in Kenya, our LGBTQ rights group in Africa. I'm in charge of everything. So I'm under attack, because then everything will, kind of fall to the wayside. So the protection is extremely heavy around. That doesn't mean if I'm stupid enough to walk into that altar, something bad isn't going to happen, because, I can say God is going to save me and jump in a shark tank. Well, they're going to bite me because I jumped into the shark tank. That was my invitation. So
have you ever had anything bad happen to you?
All the time. Really? Unexplained fires. After I was called in on a case. I just consulted, a paranormal investigator gave me a call. And then my husband and I go out to the movies, and we come home, and my kids, who were older at the time, 18 and 16, are like, yeah, there was a fire out in front of the garage. It burned one of the planters. And I went, what caused the fire? Thankfully, neighbors came over, got the kids. I mean, nothing was hurt. I said, what caused the fire? And they're like, the cord out front. It wasn't plugged in.
Oh, ooh.
So, I mean, on my way to a paranormal convention, a four-wheeler's tire blew out and knocked me off the road. I've gotten stuck in elevators on my way to teach. It happens all the time.
Do you fear it coming into your home?
That's happened a couple of times, but I'm pretty tightly sealed up right now. I don't just through me, and through my people's prayers and blessings and offering mass, and I have the Eucharist in the house, but I also have this wonderful shaman, from Brooklyn. He's a shaman trained in Haiti, in Tibet, and with the Navajo, and he locks my house down from a distance. He kind of comes in and sweeps and stuff.
So now I know who to go to if I need a shaman, because I did a presentation at a library probably about 6 months ago, and this woman could have really used a shaman, and all I could really tell her was, please look for an experienced shaman to help you, because she was living in a haunted apartment, and it was abusive and really bad situation. So to me, something like that's not something that simply a paranormal investigator could come in and rid her of. It's somebody that really needs to know what they're doing to get rid of whatever that was in her place.
Exactly. So, yes.
What is by house healing? Is it similar to cleansing houses of spirits?
That's what he does remotely. My shaman, David Franklin Farkas, he does that remotely. And I've had cases that I've referred to him. And like me, he could take a pic, needs to see the house. or the person, and he can remotely take care of things. And so he and I have worked on a couple cases together. I don't know if he's fully retired. I'll have to find out. But he, like I said, he kind of comes in and takes care of that. And then my husband, who's in IT, helps him with his computer. So we exchange services.
You barter with each other.
Exactly. He's a very good friend of 13 years now, so I'm very lucky.
That's nice. Well, I saw you did a sermon which explained why Paul said the devil rules the world through the power of the fear of death. And I've heard this before and wondered exactly what was meant by it. Can you explain, like, does it mean that people so fear death that they will believe anything that's said to them that will keep them from dying, or even do anything they can for the sake of not dying? Does that make sense?
Yes. The fear of death, theologically, it in Christianity, Catholic Christianity, it's death that Jesus fought on the cross. When he went into the tomb, he did what we call harrowed hell. He went all the way down to all the dead, opened heaven, which is what the Jewish people believed the Messiah would do, and brought them all up. That process of death, descent, ascent up into heaven, brought a human body up to God. So death doesn't touch us anymore. However, we are so afraid of death. I mean, theologically, Jesus saved us from that death. That death, the fear of death, is what causes us to do bad things. Not necessarily physical death, but wars fought over resources are about survival. Even our trauma in childhood will trigger us to behave in horrible ways because we fear ego death. Our trauma reactions were to survive psychologically. It's all about survival. It's all about getting through the pain and the blood and the mud and the tears of life, psychologically or physically. And that's what causes us to react. When you have a near miss, someone almost hits your car, your adrenaline pumps, you could have died. And there comes road rage. It's all embedded in our neuropsychiatry, in our bodies. It's all part of what we would call in Christianity, in Catholic Christianity anyway, the fallen world. We're just stuck in this situation where we can't see past our own end except through faith, where we don't want to lose the way in which we identify ourselves, whether it's our job, whether it's our family, our kids. When we put our whole identity into something, we have a tendency to grab it and hold on and do the wrong thing to hold on to it. And Jesus also said, he who seeks to save his life will lose it. But he who's willing to lose his life for my sake will find eternity. And it wasn't about martyrdom. I mean, when you're clinging to something, like someone insults my ability to be a bishop, well, my reaction to that is one of fear of ego death. I'm afraid of losing my identity. That's who I think I am. It's a death. It's a psychological death. But if I'm like, it's not something I'm particularly concerned about. I know who I am. I'm not worried about ego death. I will remain who I am no matter what you think. Then I've let go. I'm not clinging or attached to it. That attachment, that clinging, is really what causes so much of our pain in life. I mean, it's a very Buddhist principle. It's a principle across all spiritualities. You can't hold on so tightly that you're hurting everybody. You have to be able to let go, as painful as letting go can be.
Very interesting. I've heard it inferred that the paranormal and spirituality can be found throughout the Bible. And I certainly can't argue the fact that the wise men were astrologers, so it makes sense to me. It always has. You wrote a book on the subject, God and the Paranormal, Mediums, Ghosts, and the Afterlife in the Bible. I'd really love to discuss God and the paranormal and learn of other places in the Bible where the paranormal is prevalent.
Absolutely. I wrote that, started as a 30-page email because people would come from evangelical backgrounds, particularly Protestant backgrounds. In Catholicism, that death of death, we call it the death of death, allowed us to be one body with Christ, correct? So Paul says we are one body in Christ. We are the mystical body of Christ. Every single one of us is connected to Christ. Well, that means the dead and the living. We're one. So in Catholicism, of course the dead pray for you. And of course you pray for those who are going through what we call purgatory. It's not a third option. It's heaven's mudroom. It's where you go to get rid of all the resentments you might have for people you might see in heaven. It's where you go to purge ego.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's where you go to purge ego. So we pray for those people who are in that process. But if you're in purgatory, you're just getting cleaned up for dinner. It's not.
You're not there for a really long time, is what you're saying? You're just kind of.
It's eternity, so there is no time. You could describe it as a million years. You could describe it as a blink of an eye. And I actually, in studying near-death experiences, I think the life review is purgatory because you feel the consequences of your actions. When you scream at someone, you feel how they felt. You feel how they pushed that away. So Catholics say purgatory is painful. Well, it's existential pain because you see yourself for who you really are.
Emotionally, you feel all that pain that you caused on that other person for whatever it was that you did.
And you feel the good. So the better you are, the more cautious you are.
Worlds, I guess.
It equals out. So we're all together. So for me, and going all the way back to Jesus talked about this prayer for the dead. So did Paul. He talked about people who get baptized for the dead. And, this is all in scripture. What too many people do is they pick up the Bible and they read it as if it were written by some guy named Frank in Indiana in the year 2000. It wasn't. It was written by 3 dead cultures in 4 dead languages 2,000 years to 5,000 years ago. And if you don't understand what the Jewish people in the time of Jesus believed the Messiah was supposed to do, you're going to miss everything. They believed that Sheol, the abode of the dead, which unfortunately in the King James is mistranslated as hell. It's not hell. It's the place of the dead. Sheol, which is Hebrew for to ask, because what is condemned in scripture as necromancy or mediumship is nothing of the kind. What is condemned is what they call, it's a form of witchcraft. You would conjure the dead using blood. You would conjure them, trap them, and force them to tell you the future. That specific act is what's condemned in scripture. The word
they're kind of misunderstanding that completely. All of it, because I was wondering what the church's view is on that. I was born and raised a Catholic and was brought up to believe the Catholic Church frowned upon all of that, and so I always kept my gifts myself because I was afraid that I was going to be shut down. And
they do frown upon it unless you say you have the gifts of the Holy Spirit, because there are so many stories of the saints who saw dead people and prayed for them. There are stories of saints coming back from the 3rd century. Saint Polycarp, who studied under the Apostle John, who wrote the Gospel of John, was killed by lions. His followers gathered up his bones because the body was important, and they took it to a sacred place. And while they were mourning him, he appeared among them and said, "I'm with our Lord." I'm sorry, this is 3rd century, so we are talking in the early 200s AD. And this is a document from the early 200s AD. And it was perfectly normal, right? And as it should be, appearances of saints are appearances of dead people. So if you use the term mediumship, sometimes it implies the wide range. And I think what the church is trying to frown upon are things that could lead people down a poor path. And that's the Roman Catholic Church understands. So they have a very
much better to shut it out altogether than allow anything, because they may astray without really knowing what they're getting themselves into. But that just seems so, it hurts people like ourselves.
Right.
Because those people become so strong in their beliefs that if for 1 second they know about you, that's it. You're under ridicule and constant condemnation, really.
I'm the bride of Satan. I've heard it from people because I have these gifts. I've heard it from people because I'm just a woman who plays church, as I've been told.
That is terrible. Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm the first one to say that I always felt when I was a kid, those priests should have been allowed to get married. I never understood. And when you go back in history, they were. So how is it that all of a sudden they changed this course of action over time? And you see how it's wrought with problems because of them not allowing it to be so.
Right. It's not the way I think things should be, but power structures being what they are, in order to protect yourself, you cut off the inner sanctums from prying eyes, like female eyes, like married eyes. And but that's my theory anyway. And I'm always cautious about insulting people, but it is what it is. And I think what the church fails to understand, because honestly, the people who translate the Bible, what are the odds that they know Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek and Second Temple Judaism and the paranormal? What are the odds that those two are together? So they translate conjuring. They translate the Hebrew word ghost wife or ghost mistress as medium. Well, that's not what that was. It's completely separate. In fact, the reason Sheol was called Sheol was because you asked the dead the future. And in the second book of Samuel, there is a story about King Saul called, unfortunately, The Witch of Endor in the original King James. Now it's called The Medium of Endor. But in it, she conjures up the ghost of the prophet Samuel, and King Saul asks it, am I going to lose the battle? Well, Saul's name also means to ask. The Jewish people love the tongue-in-cheek stuff, and if you don't know Hebrew, don't like it. Yeah. But that's where Sheol got its name: conjure and tell the future.
Wow. Oh boy, I'm sure a lot of people out there don't have a clue. They have no clue.
No. It's hard. You've got to ask experts, but very rarely do you find an expert who knows all the different, unfortunately, I was cursed to put together things that really don't usually go together. So that's where I grab, like, science, theology, paranormal, politics, things that don't go together, I smash together. It's just the way my brain works.
Nothing is a coincidence. That was you were meant to do that for a reason. I don't believe in coincidences. So, you were meant to make that connection and talk about those things. How did you first realize you were psychic?
I never used the word. I did not say, oh, gee, I think I'm psychic until like 2010. But I'd been able to do it my whole life. And my parents, who were not religious people, in fact, my father's family is part of the Cherokee Nation, so there was more acceptance of spirituality. My mother was a pre-Vatican II Catholic and hated the church, so I was just
Isn't that interesting?
Not raised in anything.
But it's amazing that you found God at all.
I was born with this. Ever since I was a kid, I wanted the church. I was 9 years old and I wrote a 12-page dissertation about someone who died and what they went through. And I don't know how I channeled the information, but I basically rewrote Dante going through purgatory and paradise. And, I laugh at that, but I was born like
this. Wow.
So as a young kid, I would just look at someone and be like, well, I just had a flash of their funeral. And then boom. I have a very strong telepathic bent. So I know what people are thinking. And my parents used to be like, come here, are they lying to me? I know. Oh, you think it's my husband's in politics and he takes me to parties and he's like, come here, go stand over them. Tell me what you see.
So no one's beyond using your
Yeah,
abilities to help them. For the good, for the good. Let's say it's for the
yeah,
good.
he's the good. He calls me his secret weapon. But I was always able to do it, but not on command. It wasn't never seemed like something I could command. And my childhood wasn't a fun one. So the senses were often used as sort of safety measures. Like I'd be sitting in class and go, uh-oh, dad's home, which means he's drinking. So so I would just, that they were honed to a fine point
to protect yourself too.
Exactly. So it wasn't until 2009 I watched a paranormal show, and I looked at my husband and I'm like, I think that's what I can do. I think I'm a psychic medium. I never connected it ever. I'd been to psychic mediums. I didn't, and they would tell me, you're a really strong psychic medium. I'd be like, stop. It's so stupid. No, I'm not, and I just never connected the two. And so I went to a paranormal team and I said, I've never done this on command, but I think I might be, because I'd had so many experiences
Right.
And they sat me down and tested me with a bunch of strangers. And I mean, it was scary. Yeah, people were sobbing because it's names, places, names of pets, people, I can just.
Extraordinary.
Yeah. So that was fun. I mean, I had one woman fall off her chair because she came to me and she's like, I don't know why my husband withdrew $5,000 from the bank and hid it before he died of a heart attack. And I can't find it. Why would he even do that? That makes no sense. And I heard in a complete sentence and just copied, I said, I owed money to Big Pete. And she fell backward. She's like, I knew that son of a bitch, because it was Big Pete. And he would take bets. And I'd never met the woman. It was at a conference where I was just doing random readings.
I always say it's in God's time. I mean, personally, yes. I could see spirit when I was a kid. I lived in a home that was haunted, and I had premonitions too. At 12, I had a very scary premonition. They would come to me in dreams, and my mom really didn't think anything of it. She would say, oh, it's just a dream, just a dream. When I had this nightmare premonition, I told her, she said, it was just a nightmare. Don't worry about it. And then when it came true, I shut down, because here is this 12-year-old kid thinking, I could have saved those two people. I could have done something.
Right.
So, although throughout my life from 12 on until when I was 30, I always believed in this stuff. I was always drawn to it and wanted to learn more about it. But as far as I was concerned, I wanted nothing to do with it as far as any kind of gift. So I'm kind of angry about that, because I wish I had embraced it. But the day my dad died, when I was 30, he came and he let me know he was gone. He showed me walking to heaven and meaning. So that was, for me, that was a blessing, because I could share that beautiful story with the members of the family and friends that were at his wake. But more importantly, it was an awakening for me, because it was like, I almost feel like he was showing me something about myself. And even still, it took from 30 to 50 when I realized what my purpose was. And I figured that there's got to be something for me to do, but I haven't figured it out yet. But it took me until I was 50 to realize that I had to utilize my writing to help spirit get their stories out. And so to me, that's in God's time. So when you realize that in that year, when that happened, that was when you needed to know it, when it was best for you to learn.
Exactly. And it set me on the path of finding, having been called to the priesthood so strongly and wrestled with, I gotta leave, because I was a Protestant minister in seminary, converted to Catholicism, but I couldn't reconcile the two. So it was through this paranormal thing that I found the independent sacramental movement and could match my vocation. And to be perfectly honest with you, I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right.
And I love
same. You just know, and you just want to keep on growing with that and learning more and doing whatever it is that you need to do until it's your time to leave. I totally agree. That's wonderful.
God draws straight with crooked lines.
There you go. I think it's fascinating that you even delved in all of these scientific experiments is in the experiments in the neurological and biological effects of spiritual gifts. Can you tell us about them?
Well, I had a friend. Well, I have a friend, Dr. Chuck Kennedy, and he's a neuroscientist. And I was discussing with him when I was in seminary. That was when my gifts slammed open, because, like you, I'd shut them down and ignored them. They got scary. But one day I was in a graveyard, and all of a sudden I could hear everybody talking to me.
Oh,
it's a pilgrim graveyard, and I was horrified. And I actually had a friend drive me to the hospital because I thought I was having a seizure. You know, I had completely shut that down except for God. It was kind of like, here's God's conduit. No one else can come in. And my gifts just alive. I would touch someone's hand. I knew they died. I knew what age. I saw everything, that they had come back. I mean, it was just scary. I saw dead people. I saw what they looked like on the other side, tied to a chair. And I found out a binding spell had been done on them. And it was just getting crazy. And I was terrified. So I went to a doctor, who's a neuropsychiatrist at Harvard Medical. He was actually the professor of neuropsychiatry at Harvard Medical. And he tested me for temporal lobe epilepsy. And he did an experimental test on me. And he told me, I want you to use your gifts, because for me, I could control them. I'm like, I can control this feeling, you understand? I can stop it, I can start it. And he's like, well, that's interesting. All right, I'm going to tell you during the test when to do that. And after the test, he said, yeah, there's synchronicity. He said, but it's not epileptic. Synchronicity, we don't use 10% of our brain. We only use about 10 to 15% at a time, but we use our whole brain. What synchronicity is, it means that several areas of the brain light up, including those they're not quite sure what they do. And so when I met with him, I'm like, well, do I need medication? He said, and I will never forget this, he's long since passed on. He said, what happens to you isn't what's wrong with you, it's what's right with you. And don't tell another psychiatrist, because they'll well-meaningly just medicate you out of your mind.
You met the right person.
I met the right person. He was amazing. His wife was gifted. That's the only
that helps them, because people who don't know, when they either experience it with someone they love or themselves, that's almost like an awakening for them. Exactly. They realize there's something to this, and then they have more of an open mind. But when there others are just shut down because they're one-track mind, then you're screwed.
And that started my interest, because I had an extra blood vessel in the right temporal lobe. So there was asymmetry at this thing. So when I met Dr. Kennedy in 2010, I started talking to him, and I asked him, what do you think about this? And we started discussing the possibility of testing mediumship. And so using an EEG, I was the first test subject. And he's like, okay, I want you to, do something, do a reading and stuff. And he read, because he can read the EEG, that the area of the brain that would mean I was thinking of an answer was shut down. The area of the brain that would mean I'm imagining an answer or I'm lying were shut down. But this other tiny area that nobody knows what it does was lit up like a Christmas tree. So he then tested over 350 other psychic mediums, but added to the process. I mean, there were personality tests, IQ tests, but one of the big things that we found was a lot of psychics get headaches when they're doing something. They're exhausted, they feel run down if they're doing back-to-back readings. But if they're diabetic, they feel great after readings. Blood sugar plummets in 10 minutes of a reading lying flat. All right, we become dehydrated and our blood sugar will plummet up to 30 points. 30 points. Now, there was a study in Harvard, because your brain consumes most of your sugar. So there was a study saying, well, if we really use our brain power, will the blood sugar drop? And they found that, yes, it will. Students taking the SAT 4 hours of intense concentration, they got a 6-point drop. In 10 minutes, a psychic medium will drop 30. In 10 minutes of prayer, I dropped 35. So it's not just psychic mediumship, it's that spiritual connection. And
Yeah.
what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that when psychic mediums are doing what they do, when spiritual practitioners are doing what they do, their brain is doing something that it does not do for any other human activity.
Hmm.
And that, for me, is hard scientific evidence of something, of its reality, because they're not thinking, they're not imagining, they're not lying. So
Mm-hmm.
what are they doing?
Right.
And since then, I've been devising other experiments. I have too many books to write in the church. I'm like at 60 hours a week now with church work. But I'm working on a book that kind of pulls the spirituality and the science together, with physics and quantum cosmology and neuroscience. So I study
Mm-hmm.
that stuff and try to put it all together and theorize about it. So I'm about 4 chapters into that. I may have to be a series because I'm like, no, I have to write it all down. It'll be 1,000 pages, Kristina. You need
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
yeah.
People,
So
I've learned that people's minds will only go so far nowadays because they're
yes,
so involved with other things. So a book that's about 230 pages is just right. And
yes,
then take it to book two because people don't have the time or the brain power or energy because it's so consumed by everything else.
yes, yes. So I've
I
got to,
do
I've
have
got
to
to
tell
learn
you
it
though,
first.
I've never known of your church's existence, never, and I'm thrilled to hear that there is a Catholic presence out there that does believe what I feel I've lacked for so many years in that whole spectrum. So I
Yeah,
really do think I never knew it. So I'm thrilled to learn about it for sure.
thank you.
You teach a course in demonology. Have you? I mean, you were talking about exercising haunted attachments earlier, and I'm curious to know if you've ever actually been witness to an actually human exorcism or demon exorcism.
I've done a couple. Um,
I
and I'm
could never do what you do. Never. I give
yeah,
you a lot of
yeah.
credit. Oh my goodness.
Um, not it is such a small percentage of my ministry, that if it comes up, people request it. I often refer it out because I'm more of an academic. So if you're like, well, demonology, I'm like, okay, Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Persian, Islamic, which demonology? That's me. I have all of that in my head. I've got thousands of books behind me on those things written throughout the ages. So um, I'm usually called in to kind of consult on what's going on here. But when I was younger, I watched a woman almost get possessed, and I
Almost
stopped
get
it.
possessed.
I stopped it. And I couldn't tell you how I knew what to do,
Mm-hmm.
but it was so scary. And
Mm.
it was while I was sort of moving down this road towards, all right, I've got these gifts, but oh my God, I feel like I need to be grounded by the church. So I was swaying with, I want to be a minister, but for
Being
some
pulled
reason,
both ways.
I was all over the place and I
Both
didn't know
directions.
how to bring all of this together. There just seemed to be no way.
Right.
Um, St. Michael scared me into the Catholic Church, but that night we were having a meditation session at the Unitarian Church I attended, where I preached and did ministry. And that's when I realized I could see dead people again. It was after seminary, so it was kind of coming back to me. And during this session, there was the same group of 7 people. We would talk about spiritual items, and then they would put on music. They would light the candles. We would just meditate. Um, and I realized that, oh my God, I can not only see all these spirits in the room, I can make everybody else see what I see. So I was performing little experiments on them. I would run a horse around the circle, and everybody afterwards would talk about what they saw. And they're like, I saw this horse. And they would describe it. And everybody, me too. Oh, that's so. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, what am I supposed to do with this? This is nuts. But there was a woman there named Evie, I thought Evie had a speech impediment. Turned out she was from Worcester, Massachusetts. It wasn't a speech impediment, it was an accent.
Just her accent.
Yeah. After I went to Boston, I realized it. But there was something about her that bothered me so badly. And when I meet someone who has a demon, and it's a rare occurrence, there is this rage that bottles up inside of me. They describe Jesus when he encountered death as snorting in spirit. It's almost like this vomiting, and I just want to attack them. I'm not that type of person at all. I'm so calm and laid back. So this was the first time that had happened, and I hated her. And I can use the word hate. Like I wanted to claw her eyes out, and I didn't understand why. So one night we're doing meditation. I'm sitting here. Ava's over here in a chair, and it's a back chair. So she's got her hands here. And I look over, and there are two dark figures. And it was a figure I'd seen before. They weren't just black in the sense of the color. They were sucking color into them. And there was an oily quality to it. And these figures were amorphous, but one had its hands on her shoulders holding her down, and the other was pushing its way into her cheek, and she was doing this.
Oh, how awful and creepy.
And I just, again, channeling Dante, I just seemed to know what to do. Probably one of the few Catholics you'll meet who believes in past lives and says it's in the scriptures, but I knew what to do, and I don't know how I knew what to do, but with all of my might, I just threw light through me at her, and I started speaking in Latin. I didn't know Latin. I was like, ugh. And calling on Saint Michael and other saints I'd never even heard of, and they eventually went away. They just kind of shut down. Everybody turned the lights on, and Evie's still doing this. And they're like, Evie, what happened? And sorry, my stomach lurches every time I tell this story. She said, these beautiful angels wanted to enter me, and they had a message for you. And here's the funny part. I stood up. I mean, I shot up like a bolt, and I yelled, I hate you. Literally did that to her, and I was the quiet one, and I hate you. And she looked at me, and I will never forget her turn of face. She just went, but I really like you. And everybody in the room defended me. Oh, it's got to be this Pat. Oh, Evie. Da, da, da. And I never went back. I went home with the worst migraine. I didn't get migraines. I had a migraine so bad I couldn't even breathe. You want to talk about blood sugar drops? I'm sure that dropped a lot of blood sugar.
Oh, boy.
And it scared the bejesus out of me. And I, again, shut off the gifts. It's like, don't ever want to do that again. So yeah, that was my first experience.
Did you ever get a chance to tell her what that was all about?
How would I have? For me, I was a very rational, grounded person at the time, very skeptical of everything. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know what to tell her. I mean,
she's believing these liars are angels.
So I mean, how would I do that?
She probably wouldn't believe it anyway, because you believe in you seeing angels, you're gonna believe,
I'm 20. How could I possibly explain to this 50-year-old woman, for me, and I was a different person then. I wasn't very outspoken. Right. And at that time, I was just like, no, I want no part of this. I'm not going back. That was it.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That's crazy.
Huh. Yeah. They knocked my front teeth out when I was like 8. I woke up on the top bunk bed, and I was floating, because those things would come and attack me when I was a kid. I'd get slapped, I'd get bitten, I'd get hit. And I woke up on my bunk bed, and I'm right by the ceiling. And then I'm like, why do I feel weird? There's nothing beneath.
You realize you're levitating.
I was a foot next to the bunk, and then something slammed me into my dresser, cut up my mouth, and I'm 8. So what do? I do what any rational 8-year-old would do. I climb back into bed and go to sleep and don't tell anybody. So that's why I said
well, you're probably afraid they weren't going to believe you.
My parents might have, but it was just one of those things. I woke up with blood coming down my face, and I was just like, no, I'm just going to keep this one to myself.
Oh, my goodness. Well, why don't you tell the audience how they can find you and your books, please?
Oh, thank you. You can find me really through the church website is the best way, AmericanOldCatholic.org. And my email's on there. You can contact me through that. And also, you learn more about our ministries and what we're doing. You can also find the book on Amazon if you just search for my name, Kristina with a K, and the last name Rake, Rake. And by September, my first novel should be out and available too. So we'll see how that goes. But those are the best ways to find me.
Good luck with that novel. I know what it's like to have a deadline. Mine's October, and I'm pushing it because now with 2 jobs and 2 podcasts, I'm struggling to get in those interviews and the book written. So yeah. I can't imagine how busy your life must be running a whole church and all those different groups. My goodness. But thank you so much for sharing yourself with me today. I really, really had a fun conversation with you, and I'm intrigued by everything that we talked about. This has been
thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And to you, listening audience, if you liked listening to this week's episode and you're into all things paranormal, check out my other show, Eleanor Wagner's Creepin' It Real podcast out of the Coast to Coast Entertainment Network, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. And if any of you are interested in reading any of my books, you can find the links to them on my website, authoreleanorwagner.com. I write about the history of the town and location, add the paranormal story to the mix, and finish it all off with photos and evidence. Everybody loves a good ghost story, but there's nothing better than a true ghost story. So check it out at authoreleanorwagner.com. Thank you so much again.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. That was lots of fun. Thank you.